Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We're talking with the star of the A&E show, the Real Estate Commission today. What real estate sectors are safe from AI, robots, and Amazon disruption? How many deals on the commercial side are still going to implode due to mortgage rates resetting higher? And some of the best negotiation techniques from $100 million deals that you can use in your own deals, and more today on Get Rich Education. You know Mid-South Homebuyers, that top Memphis turnkey provider. I learned that a secret weapon behind their explosive growth is more than just you buying their properties. It's an executive coach. For 9 years now, their CEO Terry Kerr and his COO Pat Nix have worked privately with a coach who I've now learned from too, and he doesn't market himself online anywhere. After 12 years behind the scenes, that coach is now making himself available exclusively for GRE listeners. His name is Daniel Thomas Hind. If you're a hard-charging business owner or investor who wants to get in the best shape of your life, physically, mentally, and professionally, you can fill out an application for a free consult. This is private one-on-one coaching for those willing to go to uncommon lengths to achieve uncommon results. Thanks to Daniel, we've all become better leaders, better operators, and better men. It started by showing up for ourselves. Now it's your turn. Go to danielthomashind.com, H-I-N-D, that's danielthomashind.com, and sign up before spots fill. What if you got your mortgage loans the same place I get mine? You sure can, at Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They provided GRE listeners with more loans than anyone because Ridge specializes in investment property. They'll help you build a long-term plan for growing your real estate empire with leverage. Start your pre-qual and even chat directly with President Chaley Ridge. While it's on your mind, start at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE. From Peoria, Illinois to Peoria, Arizona, and across 188 world nations, I'm Keith Weinhold, and you're listening to Get Rich Education. Though we're a show centered on how to build wealth through residential real estate investing, today we're talking mostly about the commercial side with a guest that's more comfortable investing in commercial real estate than he is residential. We'll learn why. He is the star of the new real estate show called The Real Estate Commission that airs on A&E Network, Todd Drowlette, because he was here with us last year shortly before the show debuted, and he had so many interesting things to tell us then. That's why he's back. Now, we know that residential real estate is positioned well at surviving the boom in artificial intelligence's influence because everybody still needs a place to live. You can't download a kitchen or living room, and a chatbot can't replace a roof. But some types of commercial real estate are vulnerable to AI. I'm going to ask Todd which types and businesses are the most resilient to survive AI, robots, and Amazon, because there surely are some. He does a good job of making commercial real estate approachable to those that have never invested in it before. Contrary to the narrative, he also likes to talk about why office real estate is not dead. Occupying both worlds, I will ask him about office to residential conversions and also get his take on what is happening with commercial loans, because apartment investors have been feeling the pain ever since mortgage rates doubled and nearly tripled in 2022. I'll ask about commercial loans blowing up and just how much more of that is expected to happen, because the pain is certainly not over there. Let's meet this week's guest. A series on A&E television and streaming launched last year called The Real Estate Commission, and it's going well enough that it's gearing up for season 2. The star of that show is with us today. He was with us last year just before the show debuted, and that's when he shared all kinds of interesting insights with us, like why a gas station is on a certain side of the road. He's perhaps the most prolific commercial real estate broker in the nation. He's managing director at Titan Commercial Realty Group in New York, closing deals totaling over $2 billion all across commercial real estate sectors. He's represented everyone from local startups to national REITs. Hey, welcome back to Get Rich Education, Todd Drowlette.
Thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it. It's always great to talk to you.
Yeah, same. It was so interesting when you were here last year, and I do want to ask you about how it's going with the A&E show later. Most of our listeners own single-family rentals or small multifamily, and I think the commercial side, Todd, frankly, it intimidates some people. I know I've thought of it that way before. What are some of the misconceptions that the residential side seems to have about the commercial side?
So a big misconception is that you have to be smart to do it. You certainly do not. A lot of people also think you have to already be a multimillionaire to do it.
Right.
So the same way with residential, there's levels to it. There's levels to commercial real estate. So I say there's pros and cons, right? So in commercial real estate, if you have an office building or a shopping center or a ground lease, you rent to a McDonald's, whatever, you don't get phone calls at 2 a.m. saying, my hot water tank just exploded, my furnace isn't working. So you still get property management calls, but they're typically from, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 type of thing. And you don't need millions of dollars. People think you do. It's like you can buy a small 2 or 3 tenant office building or a 2 or 3 tenant retail shopping center. Maybe something has a nail salon, hair salon in it. Depending on the market you're in, that could be a couple $100,000 to buy. If you're in a tertiary town in the United States, if you're in a major metro, it could be $1 million, $2 million, but the rent is commensurate with what you're paying. So if you can make an 8 or 10% return, a lot of banks will finance startup people as long they're looking in commercial at the quality of the tenant and what the lease is. So you could have no experience, but if you're going to rent to a Hertz rental car, a Starbucks, a McDonald's, even if you personally have like say a 750 credit score, it's decent. It's not a perfect credit score, but you're financeable. They're lending in commercial real estate based on the credit and the length of the leases, not necessarily on your own financials. And a lot of people don't realize that. And they think, oh, the bank's never going to approve me because I've never done commercial real estate before. Well, nobody's ever done anything until they do it. Right. So as long as you start small, banks will lend to people, on smaller things. There's a ton of pros to being in commercial real estate compared to residential. There's less competition. It's easier to repeat deals because once you know one tenant's looking for something, then you can find the next thing they're looking for. And it's a small knit group. If there's 3 million real estate agents in the United States, I would say across the entire country, maybe 10,000 of us are commercial real estate agents.
Yeah.
So if you get into commercial, once you get into that network of people with a deal with the tenants and the whatever, if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. That was a very long answer to a very short question.
Well, some people even have one of the same hangups about residential real estate investing. They think just to buy income property takes an awful lot of money, not realizing you can start with a single family home of less than 300K or even less than 200K still today and make a small down payment on it. And, Todd, I think one thing that refines commercial real estate for some people and piques interest among residential investors is one of the first things that they learn when they're finding out about commercial real estate investing is the triple net lease. Oftentimes you see that abbreviated NNN out there, and how that can make things somewhat more hands-off for that commercial real estate investor. So can you tell us about triple net leases?
I sure can. And number one, the funny thing about triple net leases, none of the 3 things the N's represent start with an N. So your triple nets are literally your real estate taxes, your insurance, and your common area maintenance, none of which start with an N, yet it's called NNN.
It's kind of like reading, writing, and arithmetic. The 3 R's, only one of them starts with an R. It's a terrible acronym, but yes.
Exactly. So there's different types of triple net properties. So essentially a triple net property, unlike most residential where you're responsible, you get X amount of rent, and then out of that rent for your income, you're going to subtract out your school tax, your property insurance, liability insurance, snow plowing, lawn mowing, all that type of stuff, right? So triple net properties, you have absolute net properties, which is the best thing you can own from a landlord's perspective. Those are things that are called absolute ground leases or an absolute net lease. Typically, you'll see those in like many gas stations will be that. A lot of McDonald's deals are that, where essentially you own a piece of property, you buy a piece of property, and you go, here, you have X amount of time to put your building up, do construction, get your approvals. You're going to pay me X per month in a ground rent. You build your own building, you own your own building, you're responsible for it, and I just own the dirt. And those are typically 10 to 20-year leases with options. The downside of a triple net ground lease is you can't depreciate anything because it's just ground, right? So you don't get the depreciation you get with other properties, but you have no risk other than the credit of the tenant. So if you're signing a lease with the United States Postal Service and it's the federal government, you know you're getting that. Those will trade typically about 1 percentage point higher than US Treasuries because there's very, very little risk in it, but there is some risk. So as an investor, you need a little bit better return than the guarantee of the US Treasury. Then you have roof and structure triple net properties, where basically, okay, the roof and the structure I'm responsible for as the landlord. Anything inside of that or you're responsible for. And then the tenants pay the proportionate share of, like I said, the taxes, the snow plowing, whatever. If that's a multi-tenant building, then you run the risk, tenant moves out. As the landlord, you got to pick up that percentage. If you have a 10,000 foot building and someone's in 2,000 feet and they move out, well, now you're responsible for 20% of that tax and CAM and insurance bill until you replace it with a new tenant. But typically, if you're investing in small strip centers, smaller office buildings, which people say office is dead, I've made a fortune in office. Office is not dead. You just have to own the right office in the right place. A lot of downtown offices are dead, where they're moving to the suburbs for drugs and a lot of other issues. But typically, strip centers today, people are buying those for 8% returns to as much as 10, 12%. And a lot of times they're vacancy. That's upside you can add into it as well. But again, these are all things that you can get into for a couple $100,000 down. And there's way more room for error than people think there is. As long as you have a professional that's looking at the lease for you before you buy it, you just want to make sure the guarantee is on the lease, that you have corporate guarantees. But typically, if a bank will finance it, they're also looking at that. But it's not as scary as people think it is. And it's really a strong alternative to investing in single family homes. Not that I'm knocking single family homes. There's pros and cons to literally everything you do in life, as you know.
100%. A triple net lease where in commercial property, the tenant covers three main expenses or nets: property taxes, insurance, and the maintenance and repairs. And in a lot of the situations, like Todd is describing, that really leaves landlords responsible for little more than the mortgage, really increasing the passivity here. And, tenants that are willing to shoulder a triple net lease, I don't think of them as taking on those extra costs for nothing. I think about it as, in exchange, tenants typically pay lower rent then, and the tenant also gets more control over the property in a triple net arrangement.
That's a generally safe thing to say, but I hate saying this. I can't believe I'm even saying this, but they say location, location, location. So it really depends on the market. The biggest mistake people make, they go, I get asked all the time, should I invest in land? I'm like, hell no. Raw land, I go, when I develop stuff, I have a use for it. Once I get the approvals, then I'll close and buy the land. Land banking stuff and just going and buying land and hoping it goes up in value. I have a number one rule that I always say to people, and it's anytime you can buy $1 for 50 cents, you buy it. But you don't buy property for $1 hoping it goes to $2 because there's no guarantee that that'll happen. And raw land, you have a guaranteed, you're paying taxes every year. So just paying taxes on something that's also not returning you anything is a terrible investment. In my opinion, you're speculating. If you want to speculate, just go to the casino, play roulette, pick black or red, and you have roughly a 50-50 shot minus the 3 greens. But there's a lot easier ways to make money than buying raw land. But shopping centers, triple net properties, there's definitely ways for people to get into that are much lower risk and they're not as scary as you'd think. And many banks will finance them.
Now, if you had to buy one commercial asset today, what would that be? I know that might depend on some factors, but generally, I've got to say industrial comes to mind for me as one of the hottest commercial real estate asset classes in quite a while.
So I would pick 2 strategies. One would be high bay warehouse, whether it's specifically industrial or just warehouse, but things with high ceilings, open floor plans, like, a 20,000 foot warehouse, 30,000 feet, something in that range that a lot of people want that type of use. Warehouse rents have been increasing way faster than office or retail rents have been in the same markets. And as things get more and more automated, you still need to ship stuff, you still need to distribute stuff, you still need to get things to people's houses. So with the whole AI boom and the crazy things that are happening, I think there's going to be a lot fewer people with jobs sooner than people realize. But I do think the warehouse is a good thing to be invested in, especially if it's on main streets. It could be retail, could be warehouse, could be whatever. The second thing I'll say that's very low risk are any businesses that Amazon can't compete with you for. So a small strip center that's 2 or 3 tenants, that's a hair salon, a nail salon, service type business, retail tenants, because it's a turnover business. So like nail salons, they're never going to come to your house and do your nails unless you're a billionaire, because they can make more money with people coming to them in back-to-back appointments. So any type of service business tenant that you can have, and typically nail salons, hair salons, they don't usually go out completely. Usually if they don't want to do it anymore, they'll sell the business to somebody else and you keep a tenant. From an ownership standpoint, there's very low turnover and having to pay new brokerage fees or give tenant fit ups or free rent to like get their business up and running. So I would either go high bay warehouse with loading docks, like 18 foot, 20 foot or higher ceilings, open floor plans, overhead doors, 20, 30,000 square feet, or 2 or 3 tenant strip malls with high traffic counts, good suburban locations that have service type businesses. Those are your two. Would be very hard to lose as long as you don't overpay when you buy them.
This is such an interesting thing to say when you think about a resilient business, something that can't easily be disrupted by AI or Amazon, which something like a nail salon would fit into. Tell us about some of those other types that might fit into a small retail center that are resilient that way.
End caps, so any kind of like a Popeyes, a McDonald's, anything that's drive-through or food. Even you're starting to see, the Tesla robots, and you're seeing more and more of that. However, people will still buy the food. So whether the employees are actually still in there, it's all robots. They still physically need a place that's close and convenient for people to drive to, or even the food delivery apps. Like a lot of the retail restaurants now are telling me 30, 40% of their orders are delivery through like Uber Eats and whatever. Yep. But those are great tenants to have because they're still making money. And as the world's changing, they're adapting. And I want tenants that adapt to the changing world. And honestly, they can afford to pay more. This is terrible. But from a strictly landlord perspective, the fewer employees they have, you don't have workers' comp claims. You don't have the insurance. You don't have all those things. The more you can afford to pay rent to landlords. So as the world's changing, those type of retail, small strip centers, end caps, fast food, QSR type food, quick serve retail, those are definitely things that I would be considering if I was someone getting into this. And they're things that I also own. So I always recommend what I would do myself.
Right. And with that commercial tenant, if they're serving fast food, yes, it's not like their customer has to physically show up there at that business for that business to thrive.
And actually, if you have them as a tenant, because of the delivery, like with a drive-through, you're typically only working off 1 or 2 miles. But Uber Eats or these other meal services, they're now going out 5, 6, even 7 miles in some places. So that actually means their sales could be higher. And another thing I didn't mention, but now I'm thinking, a lot of restaurant tenants will pay a percentage rent. So actually, as their sales go up, even though there's not more infrastructure, strains from more customers coming in and out of your property, as they're doing the meal delivery, you're actually potentially be getting a cut of that as a landlord with percentage rent, which is a thing that doesn't exist in residential real estate, obviously. There's multiple streams of income for triple net properties at times when you have percentage rent that doesn't exist in warehouse, where it's in retail. It doesn't exist in office, doesn't exist in warehouse, doesn't exist in residential. So that can be a nice bonus. And you see that with supermarkets, restaurants, different types of retailers pay percentage rent.
Okay, so in a sense, Todd, we've been talking about going against the flow, if you will, in being in businesses that are resilient toward disruption from AI or Amazon. But while we're talking about industrial real estate, warehouses do come to mind for me soon afterward. I think generations ago, maybe industrial had the connotation of a dirty factory. But today, when I think about warehouses, I think about Amazon fulfillment centers or AI data centers. So what is the business like for investing in those sort of warehouse deals? And how do those deals even get put together for these warehouse types?
So you have 2 types. So you have people who do spec building. So there's guys that will go out and say, hey, I'm in the warehousing business. And they'll go through, they'll get approvals, and they'll say they'll buy 10 acres, 20 acres, 30 acres, and they'll say, okay, we're going to put, I'm making this up, 500,000 square feet of warehouse on this. They'll go get it approved. But they basically will put up a spec building of 40,000, 50,000 feet. And then they'll lease it. Depending how long it takes them to lease it, then they'll build the next one. Once you kind of have one building up, it's much easier to pre-lease. If you just have a piece of dirt and say, hey, I'm going to do a warehouse building here, and let's say you have a direct in specifically with Amazon, and they're like, hey, we need to be in Schodack, New York, at this exit within 10 miles of that. And it's like anything. Once you do something for someone once, they're working across the whole country. So if you're particularly good in a specific region as a developer, they will often say, hey, find me a spot here or here, because they're in the business of getting open and running data centers. They don't care if you're making a profit on the real estate, and they're not set up to locally go through the approvals, know the politicians, know the process, that whole thing. So there's opportunities like that. If you don't know anyone from a hole in the wall, if you have a big piece of property and you start with whatever you're comfortable with to spec out a warehouse, 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet, see how long it takes. Do you lease that in 6 months? Does it take 3 months? Does it take a year? And then you can kind of take some of the profits from that, either refinance, or if you have a construction loan, then build the next one, build the next one, and build the next one. And you can kind of build out as the demand comes along.
You're listening to Get Rich Education. We're talking to the star of the A&E show, The Real Estate Commission, Todd Drowlette. So much when we come back. He's going to update us on what's happening with office to residential conversions, how much higher interest rate pain is still going to surface in some of these deals, and a negotiation tactic or two that you can use for your own residential deals. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Flock Homes helps you retire from real estate and landlording, whether it's one problem property or your whole portfolio, through a 721 exchange. Deferring your capital gains tax and depreciation recapture. It's a strategy long used by the ultra-wealthy. Now, mom and pop landlords can 721 their residential real estate. Request your initial valuation. See if your properties qualify at flockhomes.com/GRE. That's FLOCKhomes.com/GRE. Let me ask you something. If you've worked hard to build wealth, is your money positioned to actually support your goals? A lot of accredited investors leave capital sitting in cash because it feels safe, but inflation and missed income opportunities can quietly erode its value. Freedom Family Investments offers Freedom Notes for investors seeking structured income backed by real estate. It's a straightforward approach built on real assets, not speculation. In full disclosure, I'm an investor myself. What I like is that their team walks you through how it all works so you can decide if it aligns with your portfolio and income goals. Every investment carries risk and nothing is guaranteed, but with a track record of consistent on-time investor payouts, they've built real credibility. Go to freedomfamilyinvestments.com to book a clarity call or text FAMILY to 66866. That's FAMILY to 66866.
What's up, everyone? This is HGTV's Tariq El Musa. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. This week, we're talking with Todd Drowlette, the star of the A&E television and streaming show, The Real Estate Commission. We're talking about commercial real estate today, and really, I'm doing it through a residential way of thinking because I'm a residential real estate investor, and you, the listener, likely are too. And Todd, interestingly, part of that comes from your world moving over and meeting our world. Talk to us about office to residential conversion, something that really picked up in light of the pandemic 5 years ago.
Well, I'll tell you about some of the pitfalls, and I'll tell you the huge opportunities. If you have office buildings that are vacant, particularly in downtown municipalities like in Albany, New York, our state capital in New York, politicians and the government right now are creating a lot of incentives to convert those, where they're putting up grant and giving away millions of dollars to private developers that you don't have to repay. So there's a huge opportunity to have people take on a lot of the risk for you to do it. Some of the pitfalls people get into are you want to pick the right office building to do it for. So You want to make sure that that office building either has on-site parking garages or on-site parking, because I've seen people try to do it in downtowns where there's no parking, and you can put a lot of money into a building with no parking. And if you're not in New York City, where people are used to, and you're competing against suburban apartments, that's a tough sell. So that's number one. Number two, for whatever reason, people really want in office buildings and downtown settings, floor to ceiling windows. So you really want to pick office buildings that already have floor to ceiling windows, because it can be very expensive. If you get over 3 floors, it can be very expensive to cut out windows and make them larger. And this is a huge money potential pitfall if you're not careful. Many municipalities and states have different codes for elevators for residential buildings than they have for office. It makes no sense to me. But office buildings, it has to do with fitting. The elevator has to be large enough that you can get a stretcher if someone had a heart attack and needed to be wheeled out. For some reason, residential buildings require larger elevators. And if your shaft isn't big enough and your car isn't big enough, you could have $1 million or more of an unexpected expense to either make the shaft bigger. Some buildings, you can't even do it.
Wow.
But if it was originally set up for, it doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah, this is news
because
to
if
me.
you have an office building that's 30 stories tall, people could have heart attacks in the middle of the day at the office. So how is that any different than if they're at home in an apartment and have a heart attack? So it doesn't make any sense to me why the code is different for the fire code. But in New York State, the fire code is different, and that can be astronomically expensive, or it can literally stop your project dead in the tracks if it just becomes cost prohibitive to do it.
That's something that I never would have thought about. I generally like to see office to residential conversions revitalizing central business districts in our cities. You talked about the parking before, having less need for parking. If people can walk to work and where they work, that increases the walkability of an area. I like so many things about office to residential conversions, despite all the hardships and the pitfalls you have to avoid.
Oh, they're great. You just want to make sure you're picking the right building. So my point is, if you have 5 or 10 vacant office buildings, mostly vacant office buildings, just make sure you're choosing the right one. And before you buy it, do your due diligence and go through with contractors and engineers and architects that understand all the codes and say, hey, the other positive thing that saves money in office conversions is most office buildings, if you have an elevator bank, typically have bathrooms directly across from the elevator bank. So water and sewer can be very expensive when you're running apartments. So having central lines going up through usually concrete floors can save you a ton of money in the design and the layout of how you place the units and do it around central bathrooms. But typically larger office buildings will have plumbing and sewer on different parts of the floor. So it just means you have to go less distance and it saves money. And a lot of office buildings, even older ones, have higher ceilings, which today is very desirable for apartments. So if you can have a building that has natural light, high ceilings, and you can get grant money to do it, that's definitely something people should look into. And even with a smaller building, I've seen people in New York, people are converting 5,000 foot office buildings into like 5 units. There's money to be made. You just have to buy right. I always say, if you can buy $1 for 50 cents, buy it. Don't buy $1 and hope it goes to $2.
A lot of these physical limitations, oftentimes in the office to residential conversion, and Todd, in the residential world, oftentimes apartment buildings have been problematic. A lot of these syndicators have had their deals blow up because in 2022 or earlier, they got 5 to 7 year fixed rate debt. Those deals are coming due. The mortgage payments double, and a lot of times the operator just can't meet it, and it blows up. And apartment building values have been down about 30% nationally, largely for that reason. Even though an apartment building owner gets a commercial loan, I still want to know from the commercial side and the commercial use type, how much higher interest rate pain do you see that has surfaced and is still going to surface?
So I'll answer this by quoting my grandmother. She said, anytime you want to cook, whatever size pot you think you need, pick twice that size pot and start using that.
Yeah.
So I say the same thing when you're financing a deal or you're writing it out and seeing what your returns are. I always say to people, make sure that you have a big enough cushion in there for all the things you can never predict. In commercial loans, there's a ton of guys that are about to lose their shirts, and you're starting to see it because, unfortunately, I don't know if it's true in residential real estate, but in commercial real estate, I've seen guys go from nothing to 50 million, 100 million, $200 million net worths, but I've also seen them lose everything. So what happens in commercial real estate that you don't want to do is so many people say OPM, use other people's money, use other people's money, use other people's money, which is fine as a strategy. But what you don't want to do is cross collateralize loans. So if you have one property and then you go, oh, let me refinance that and then buy a next property, and I'll refinance that and buy the next property. And then the bank's like, okay, we'll refinance that, but we're going to now tie all these properties together as one mortgage, or you're going to cross guarantee these properties.
Right.
The problem with that is the people who do that strategy, if you started at that, in 2021, when interest rates, you could get things at 3.75%. Well, commercial loans are 5-year loans typically, and they might have 20 or 25-year amortization. So unlike a residential mortgage that's a 15 or 20 or 30-year self-amortizing loan, they're not. At the end of 5 years, you have a balloon payment that you have to pay off. So if interest rates are going down, that's amazing, because if your tenants are the same, and even if your rents didn't change and you bought something at 6% and now it's at 5%, your cash flow goes up significantly and nothing happened other than your refinance. The problem is you have a ton of guys right now, guys, women, people that were financing stuff 5 years ago at 3.75%, and now interest rates are hanging 6.25%, 6.5%, depending on what the property is, maybe 7%. Same tenants, same everything. You're giving the keys back to the bank because you're broke now, because all of a sudden you're financing, you squeeze too much out of the deal. I would say you can take on the in or you can take on the out, but you can't have both. So when people are financing stuff, they just need to make sure, like, here's another thing I'll go off on. A lot of people will buy stuff with tax credits, and you see it even with residential apartments. A lot of guys are financing that, selling people tax credits. Economies and things change and things move. If a deal is so tight that you need the tax credits to make the deal make sense, don't do the frickin' deal, because tax credits should be an added bonus that's just, hey, that's a nice adding to the cushion. So many people have razor thin margins. They go, oh, well, I do the tax credits. If I can get 70 cents on the dollar, this is how I make the money. I tell people I will have nothing to do with tax credit deals unless it's strictly a bonus. The deal has to stand on its own. And always assume in the course of 5 years, interest rates could go up 3 points or down 3 points. Most people will not listen to me and will not do that. If you do that, you'll never get killed and you won't lose a property. It's super conservative, but there's enough money you can make. And if you buy it right, that's how you can afford to figure that spread in when you're financing something. But just so many people get greedy. And I just think back to my friend Bob Bear, who died. I met him when he was like 75. He was a billionaire, self-made. And he used to say to me, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And when people would ask, how rich are you? He knew how rich he was. He would say, I don't owe anybody in the world a dime. And to me, my entire strategy is I don't owe anybody in the world a dime. So I personally look at deals and say, out of my own cash flows, what can I buy? And instead of buying 4 properties a year, I might buy 1 property a year. But if I'm buying that and compounding my returns, I'm not paying interest to the banks. So it's just a different strategy. I sleep at night. I'm like the multimillionaire next door. I don't live extravagantly. I don't drive Ferraris and Rolls Royces. That's just not my thing. But I sleep at night and I have peace, which is important to me, knowing I don't owe anybody in the world a dime. But will I get as rich as the guy who's risking everything? No. But real estate to me is musical chairs, and the music always stops at some point, and there's never enough chairs for everybody. But if you're somebody who's in a cash position, which you're going to be going into in the next 6 months to a year, on the residential and commercial, I think there's going to be blood in the streets. And I think people who are sitting in cash are going to have like a once in a lifetime opportunity to buy things at a deep discount.
Philosophically, we're different in one way. I use debt and leverage to grow larger, but ensuring that I do have enough income to cover the mortgage and all the operating expenses. But Todd, to your analogy about your grandmother in selecting a bigger pot than what she would need to cook whatever she's going to do, when it does come to debt, the last time I bought an apartment building myself, which wasn't recent, I could have chosen 7-year fixed rate debt with a balloon at the end or 10-year fixed rate debt with a balloon at the end. The 10-year fixed rate debt cost me 0.25% more in mortgage rate, which dented my cash flow during the entire duration of that loan. But I did indeed choose that 10-year loan in order to have that much more certainty And I sure am glad that that's what I did.
That's always the game, because it's people think that rich people know what you don't, or it's inside deals, or whatever. I'm like, number one, if you sit in a room with a bunch of rich people, yes, they will work against you if it benefits them to work together. But if it doesn't, you have egos and separate interests that are all competing. And there's always that thing of, I know very, very rich people who could buy and sell me 100 times over. And I also know that you don't know what you don't know. And the world has gotten so complicated, and financial markets are all intertwined globally. Anyone to be able to predict, it's like, it's a crapshoot when you're like, okay, do I take 7 years? Where do I think interest rates will be in 7 years? It's hard to say where interest rates going to be tomorrow. You ask a banker tomorrow, they can't tell you. So it's like, what's your best educated guess of 7 or 10 years? What's the better play? But I always go the conservative route.
I think it's easier to predict the future direction of capital prices than it is interest rates myself.
But I will say also, I am the exception. And if you have 100 other guests on here in the next year, well, 51 more guests on here in the next year,
yeah,
they would all say, Todd's an idiot. That's terrible advice. If you want to get rich, literally leverage, just do it intelligently. And I acknowledge that. I don't see the world the way other people do, but my end game is to be rich and comfortable and to sleep at night with peace. And that's why I choose to do what I do, realizing I'm giving up. It's the, what are you giving up to what do you gain benefit analysis? And I'm realizing I'm giving up some upside in my total potential net worth, but I like peace. And, I had anxiety for years. I don't have it anymore. And I live my life to be as anxiety free as I can possibly be.
Well, that's interesting. And that certainly works for you. Todd, what's one negotiation tactic that you get from dealing with, well, let's say, Deca or Centa $1 million commercial deals that our listeners could use the very next time that they buy a rental property?
So the number one mistake I think people make is they assume what's motivating the other person, and they assume it's always price. So anytime I'm going to negotiate a deal from someone, whoever has the most information always wins, and whoever doesn't need the deal always wins.
Yeah.
So I want to know as much about that other person on the other side as I am. Are they going through a divorce? Are they desperate? Do they hate each other? Is it a partnership breakup? Did somebody inherit it and they live 5 states away and don't even know what this thing is worth that they have? So the number one thing from a negotiating standpoint is understand exactly who you're negotiating with and what's motivating them. From an actual tactic standpoint, just think logically through whatever the process is. And you can always go up. You can't go down. So the key is to offer as little as you can without insulting the person so they don't even respond. So figure out what that fine line is. And before you go into the negotiation, know what your walk away number is. That's just the point you're not getting over. The fast way to lose in a negotiation is to get stuck in a bidding war. There's nothing I want so much that I'm going to overpay for it. So when people go, well, I have somebody else that's interested, I go, then sell it to them. Yeah, I don't need it. Sell it to them. And then the other thing I'll say is, if you start the negotiation, this is the one piece. Say your number and shut up. So many people are scared of silence. And then if the person doesn't immediately respond, they go, oh, well, I guess I offered you 500,000. I mean, I guess I could go 550. As soon as you talk after you give a number, you're negotiating against yourself. So throw the number, let it land wherever it lands, and do not talk until that person responds to you. That's like the number one mistake I see people do. They throw out a number, they get nervous with the silence, and then they immediately go up in their offer. That person could have been thinking, oh my God, did I forget to call back my whatever? And they're not even thinking about the number you just threw out, but people just assume, oh God, the number was too low. And then they negotiate against themselves. Do not do that.
Risk the awkward silence. And yes, to your point about learning more about the other side, terms are often more important than price, for sure. Well, Todd, a lot of commercial real estate content in mainstream media, it tends to focus on these big institutional deals. But what has made your A&E show interesting, the Real Estate Commission is what it's called, is it focuses more on sort of leasing and this negotiation that we were just touching on there. And that's what makes you interesting. So tell us about what audiences can expect for season 2 of the Real Estate Commission on A&E.
So season 2, you will 100% see real landlords, real brokers, real investors. You'll see real retailers. You'll see people relocating their offices in New York City. You'll see stuff in upstate New York. It's generally in the Northeast. In the first season, we helped a kitchen cabinet manufacturer relocate their suburban offices in Philadelphia. I sold a 50-unit HUD property that has a HAP contract you might be familiar with. That was crazy, going through a bankruptcy foreclosure proceeding, 2 year. That was crazy. Yeah, so you're going to see more of that. It's a documentary. It's not a reality show. So you're watching the deal as it unfolds. Some things have happy endings. Some things have terrible endings, but they're real endings either way. So people will see a lot of that, of deals happening in the Northeast. And if someone's listening and they're a business owner and they want to be part of the show, they can apply. We're announcing the casting. Will be open for about 3 weeks across the U.S. They can go to the realestateCommission.com//TV and they can apply to be part of the show.
Now, since you started this last year, I want to ask, has this A&E exposure helped you generate more business and create traffic? I would really think so.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, how, because anything new, you never know, right?
Yeah.
Like I put time and energy into it. It definitely did. Definitely people start to notice you, which is a little weird. I was in a cell phone store and it was playing and the guy's like, oh, it's you. Like, and then everybody who's walking in, he's like, hey, look, it's the guy on TV. He's right here. That was like kind of an awkward, like, I'm like, okay, this is weird. The guy was excited. So that was fine. It's an adjustment of things, but it definitely has increased our overall visibility and people reaching out to do deals with us for sure.
Is there any last resource you'd like to tell our audience about?
I would just quickly announce the first season did so well. We're actually doing a spin-off show that'll also air on A&E called The Real Estate Commission New York that we're casting in upstate New York as well as New York City for brokers, agents, home sellers, home buyers that will actually document real buyers, real sellers, same thing. It'll follow our format, which I know there's a million shows on TV about real estate. Those are reality shows, not docuseries. And I'll say, without going into the details, there's a very big difference between those two and what you're actually seeing on camera and what's happening. That will air in March of 2027, back to back with our show. I will make cameos in that, but I'm executive producing that show. So from your residential audience, that's a show they should tune into. I think they'll get a lot out of it.
Congratulations. Your show has had so much success that it's setting the template for another show. And it has been most interesting since we first had you here last year to follow this along. Todd Drowlette, it's been a valuable chat. Thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
I'd love to come back anytime. And thank you so much for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Drowlette is spelled Drowlette. Todd and I talk a good bit off mic as well. In addition to the elevators, sometimes he emphasizes how cumbersome to impossible HVAC system compatibility is when you're doing office to residential building conversions too. You just never seem to hear about an easier than expected office to residential property conversion. It is most interesting and rare that Todd is not much of a leverage guy at all, whereas in the vein of financially free beats debt free, I like to approach deals where the interest cost is lower than the expected opportunity cost. When it comes to negotiating, some of Todd's approach, it's similar to what prominent hostage negotiator Chris Voss shared with you here on the show a few years ago, that silence is powerful in negotiating. In fact, if you feel like you need to say something to fill the silence, use what Chris Voss calls the mirroring technique. And the mirroring technique, that is simply repeating what the other party just said, kind of like a parrot would. For example, if you're trying to buy a property and the seller says that the best they can do is sell it to you for $550K and a delayed 90-day close, reply with $550K and a 90-day close. And then listen to see if the seller comes down from there. Or instead, you can simply say nothing and just sit there with the silence like Todd recommended. The reason I like these particular negotiating techniques right here is that they're easy to remember and they're easy to do. You either remain silent or, per the mirroring technique, you just repeat the last words that the other party said. Thanks to Todd Drowlette today. You can check out The Real Estate Commission on A&E. Coming up here on the show soon, back to residential, where For the first time ever on the show here, we discuss what might be the greatest real estate cash flow strategy because it's becoming quite popular today. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.